Trump actually gave a speech today that had some substance. I don't know if we're going to necessarily agree with this substance, but it had some substance. It was in Detroit this afternoon. Actually, one of the members of the Progressive Army was there and sent me some pictures of the protesters on the outside. So he gave a speech in Detroit this afternoon, and he used Detroit as a textbook case of America's great past, alluding to when Detroit was booming somewhere around the 50s, that represented this period that he's referring to when he says, make America great again. Notwithstanding all of the baggage of the 50s and everything else that comes with the 50s, he was trying to make an economic point, and he presented his ideas, not really policies, but more so ideas on tax policy, on trade, on regulations, and he was interrupted on a regular basis by protesters. And I was reading one place, I'm trying to think where I read this, that some of the protesters were trying to get him off script, that their goal was to get him off script and get him to just talk. That's what protesters do. So I want to break down some of the things that he talked about in his economic policy speech. So first of all, on taxes, this is the first time I think I've gotten something substantive enough from Donald Trump to actually have a discussion on his policy, what he wants to do. Trump wants to reduce the tax brackets from seven brackets down to 3. And this is a quote from his speech. He said, our current tax code is so burdensome and complex that we waste 9 billion hours a year in tax code compliance. My plan will reduce the current number of brackets from 7 to 3 and dramatically streamline the process. So the top tax bracket would be those earning $189,301 to whatever, to a billion, to infinity, right? So the first question is the number of brackets the reason why the tax code is so complex? Because that's what he's trying to pass off here. He's trying to say that by breaking this down from 7 brackets to 3, we're going to make it more efficient for America to file their taxes. And we're going to save countless hours and save companies and individuals in this case, millions upon millions of dollars in tax preparation. But it's something that one of my researchers pointed out. The thing about this is that the tax code isn't complex because of the number of brackets. The tax code is complex because of the number of exceptions and exemptions and loopholes, the number of ways that you can get around the tax code. So cutting it down from 7 brackets to 3 does absolutely nothing to streamline the process. In other words, what Trump is saying, this is the reason why I'm doing it, absolutely has nothing to do with what he's trying to do. The only thing cutting it down from 7 to 3 brackets does, it ensures that a person who makes $50 million a year pays about the same tax rate. They do pay the same tax rate as someone making $189,301 a year. In other words, and I'm about to say something that probably will be misconstrued, but hell, it's hard in certain cities to live on less than $150,000 a year. All right. I know for a fact, I know people, and I have personally lived on less than $30,000 a year. But in certain areas, less than $150,000 means that you're not in the middle class for that area. $150,000 is like an average lifestyle. If you live in a city like Boston, if you live in New York, you're just probably at the median income, just in the middle class. So $189,000 is not a lot of money. I would be happy to make that much right now individually. I would. But what it does, it ensures this 7 to 3, breaking 7 brackets down to 3, essentially makes sure that someone who's making millions of dollars a year pays the same tax code as someone who's in the upper middle class. And oh, hell, I'll just say it. You can disagree with me if you want to. The toughest place to be in terms of the tax code is to be in the middle, in the upper middle class, to be making more than $100,000 a year. Because if you're making more than $100,000 a year, $130,000 a year, you owe the federal government. You get no exemptions. You don't care how many children you get. You know, you don't get any child care credits or anything like that. You owe the government, and you're not getting anything from the government. So the first thing that jumped out on the paper for me is that he is flattening out, right? He's basically making a regressive tax code, first of all, and he's flattening out the tax code so that a millionaire can pay, not even a millionaire, billionaires will pay the same rate as someone who is just in the upper middle class. So he's creating a regressive tax code, and his justification is that he's trying to simplify it, yet he's not addressing the things that would simplify it, which would be to get rid of all the exemptions, all of the loopholes, all of the exceptions. He doesn't want to get rid of that because that actually benefits the wealthy. And those who are wealthy can actually afford to pay for those countless hours. So it's no skin off their back to drop $30,000 on a tax accountant for a cycle so that they can save millions of dollars, right? And so they have no problem with the complexity of the code. I remember sitting with my accountant one time, and he showed me his bookshelf with the tax code for 2006. Well, hell, what year was that? 2011. The last time I was in his office. But there were volumes of books, literally thousands of pages that he could go to and pull out and say, you're eligible for this and this exemption and this, we can fix this for you. And I only had access to that because I actually made enough money then to do something like that. So it's not a problem for somebody who makes the money to go to a tax accountant and drop whatever they have to drop to get these loopholes and save all kinds of money, right? So he's positioning this as a means of appealing to people who are frustrated with the IRS, frustrated with the tax code because they can't do it by themselves, right? And they don't want to pay a tax accountant. But in reality, he's not even fixing that problem. He's just flattening out the tax base. He's making a more regressive tax code. But I don't know if his supporters actually care about that. He's looking to remove the carried interest loopholes. It's a standard Republican tax cut in many ways that he's offering in other places. He says that these reforms will offer the biggest tax revolution since the Reagan tax reform, which unleashed years of continued economic growth and job creation. I should read this line for line. my research assistant put in here, too bad that 40 years was wait, hang on. Too bad that was 40 fucking years ago. I thought you were going to say it was a fucking terrible 40 years. But anyway, one bright spot, sorry guys, it was an inside joke. One bright spot was his childcare. That appealed to me. He said parents can fully deduct the average cost of childcare spending from their taxes. Like, whew, that's huge. That's huge because I pay more in childcare than I do living expenses. So that would have been huge. But too bad my kid is going to public school starting next month. So it really won't help me too much. But it'll help, you who are getting ready to have kids. But anyway, all right. So on corporate taxes, he's saying no American company. This is a quote. Donald Trump said no American company will pay more than 15% of their business income in taxes. In America, our average effective tax rate is 27.1%, right? So everyone always uses 35% as that's what they quote and say, America's taxes are far too high, and they quote 35%. Well, the average effective rate is about 27.1% compared to 27.7% for the other 30 OECD countries. So our effective tax rate is actually on average lower. Granted, there are some nations like Ireland and Singapore who have ridiculously low effective tax rates, which is why you see companies setting up shop here in the United States, but also in Ireland, also in Singapore. I forgot the tiger. Hell, my last economic course was too long ago. But essentially, he's trying to appeal to this standard Republican talking point on corporate taxes as well as income taxes, when the reality is that he's not going to address the underlying issue. In either scenario, he's not going to address the underlying issue. No surprise, right? But the reason this is worth talking about is because this is a standard Republican ploy. This is what they do. And they talk about the complexity of the tax code, and their solution is to lower the brackets, or flatten the brackets rather, not addressing the complexity of the tax code, because the complexity of the tax code actually benefits the wealthy to the detriment of the poor or the middle class. And in the corporate tax rates, he's not addressing the fact that it's essentially a race to the bottom. If we start lowering our effective tax rates and our quoted tax rates to 15%, this is not going to stop companies from doing what they have been doing for years, which is claiming their earnings in a foreign country so that they can pay a lower tax rate in that country. Companies will always seek out the lowest tax rate possible, and chances are they're going to find countries that will accommodate that. So that's the underlying problem, is that so long as we as nation states compete with each other by lowering our tax code, then we're going to always have to lower our tax code lower and lower and lower. It's a race to the bottom. But Donald Trump will not state that. He's going to make it seem as though all we need to do is lower our tax rate, and companies will start coming back and bringing money back to the United States. All right. So, which goes to the next point, is that he wants to remove corporate tax inversions, and his plan is to give them a 10% tax holiday. Right. Corporate inversion, the tax dollars that are overseas that they claimed that they made overseas, paying a lower tax rate. Those dollars are still technically on paper overseas. And he's saying that we can repatriate those funds if we give them a corporate tax holiday of 10%, which is lower than even his proposed tax rate of 15%, which is exactly a tax holiday. I think the last time we had a tax holiday was with George Bush, and was either 5% or 10%. I know it's a big difference, but I'm going off of pure memory at this point. So this is a giveaway. This is a giveaway. And all corporations have to do for these giveaways, and you have to watch Democrats also, because Democrats will do this as well. They will give them a tax holiday, and they would have to sit on their funds overseas for 4 to 8 to 12 years, and then they can bring those funds back at a much lower rate than they would have if they had declared those earnings here in the United States. So standard ploy. Bernie Sanders pointed it out quite well. I believe Elizabeth Warren talks about it at length, but we've seen this playbook before, which is why it's worth talking about, particularly on this next point, where I see a lot of progressives being tripped up by Donald Trump.